Hola, señorita.
Señora, estoy casada.
Have you ever wondered when to use señorita versus señora? Well, we've gotten this comment a lot on the channel and during our Spanish Immersion Retreat, so we figured why not make a quick little video about it.
That's right, so we're Jim and Mai from Spanish and Go, your resource for learning real-world travel Spanish.
And at the most basic level, the difference between señora and señorita has to do with whether a woman is married.
But sometimes that's hard to know if the person maybe is not wearing a wedding ring, or what if this person was married recently and just got divorced.
Or maybe you just met and so you have no information about the other person and all you can do is guess. What do you do in situations like that? Well, that makes everything much more complicated, so we're here to help you answer those questions. So, Mai, how do you feel about this word? What do you think is the best approach here? Do you prefer that people call you a señorita or a señora? What's the dynamic there?
Yeah, it can be complicated because, for example, I am a 35-year-old woman who is married, so technically I qualify as a señora, but on the inside, I don't feel like a señora because I feel like a señora is someone who is 50 years of age and older, someone who has a higher social status, or someone who, I don't know, has more madurez. Maturity?
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're more mature than your typical señorita, but maybe not as mature as a señora.
Right. And also, like, I know that I don't qualify as a señorita. Again, we've been married for over 12 or almost 12 years now. And so, for a long time ago, I have not been called a señorita because I'm not in my 20s anymore. And so, it can be a little bit complicated to know whether you should address someone with the señora or a señorita.
So, what should someone do in a Spanish-speaking country in terms of addressing another woman if they're unsure about how to address them?
Yeah, I think it is better to go with señorita instead of using señora. That's what I do in situations where maybe, I don't know, I'm going to make a reservation on the phone for a restaurant, or if I have a question at a grocery store and I want to ask a person there, a woman, quickly, or I'm about to buy a bus ticket. You know, in short interactions where I don't have the time or the need to sit down and figure out the social status of the other person, or like I'm not gonna pay attention to, like, is she wearing a ring, is she married, does she have kids or not. In quick situations, I just want to keep things casual. I don't want the situation to be too formal. Then I just go with señorita. And so I call and I am like, buenas tardes, señorita, puedo hacer una reservación. I don't know anything about this other person. And honestly, I don't care. I just need a little bit of communication to solve a problem that I have. So I just go with señorita.
Okay, that makes sense. If you don't know the other person and it's just a quick interaction and you can't see them or anything, it's kind of better to err on the side of señorita just because it sounds a little bit more polite, don't you think?
Yeah, and that's also something that we should mention. In Latin America, many women are not comfortable with sharing things like their age or their social status. They often don't even share this information with their relatives or friends, right? Like, some people don't know how old their aunts are or her grandmother is. It can be an uncomfortable situation for some women. So why make it even more uncomfortable when you can just go with señorita? This is a word that is typically used to keep things on the lighter side, to make situations a bit less formal. It can still be very polite to call a mature woman señorita, but it depends on the way you say it, maybe.
Yeah, and this is a term that changes along with the rest of the language, right? All languages are evolving, and so is Spanish. So I think maybe in the past, señora would be more respectful, but times are changing. Señorita can be the better option when you are unsure. And as a man who has lived in Mexico on and off for the past 10 years, I tend to err on the side of señorita if I'm unsure as well. It just seems a little nicer when interacting with other women and you're unsure whether they are married or have kids. Sometimes it can be taken as a compliment as well for a woman who maybe is even in her 40s to be referred to as señorita by a stranger. It's kind of like, oh, well, that's nice, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But if you're getting a little more familiar with the person, it can also be polite to ask them how you would like them to be referred to as, right? And so, what are some phrases in Spanish we could use to ask this sort of thing?
Yeah, so it can be very simple, something like, ¿Cómo le gustaría que la llamara? It sounds very formal, maybe, but you could also just say, ¿Le puedo decir señorita? Or ¿Le puedo decir señora? There are other ways, but also you can just start calling someone señorita or señora and see how it goes. I personally have never been corrected when I use señorita in these short interactions, like I was describing before, on the phone or like going to the bank and talking to the secretary there. I've never been corrected and I've always used señorita.
Okay, and there's also a third option, isn't there? Seño, what's up with that word?
Yeah, so seño is kind of like an in-between word between señorita and señora, but with the difference that seño is used more in situations that are casual. So let's say that you are the owner of the grocery store in town and you see your customers often, you know about their social status, or you know if they're married or not, if they have kids or not, you know their age, but you don't want to say señora and make it too formal. You don't want to say señorita either, then you go with seño. But again, it's very casual, informal. I mean, it's not rude at all. It can also be a little bit of a term of endearment to call someone seño.
Yeah, and I remember we heard this word all the time in Guatemala and Ecuador. I've heard it a little bit here in Mexico as well. You said it's used throughout Mexico, but in some areas it just really stood out to me how often they were using this word. So if someone is unsure of which to use, do you think that would be a good option as well, seño?
Maybe. For that one, I'm not sure because I think it shows respect, but it's also very casual. So this is something I would use maybe with an older, mature woman, and I don't want her to feel like super formal, like señora. So I would go with seño.
Okay.
But that's maybe how I would use it.
All right. And when you're in a market or at a restaurant in a Spanish-speaking country, whether in Mexico or elsewhere, you're going to hear these words all the time, and you can really get a good feel for how to use them when you're actually in the country and having these authentic experiences, which is why we created our Spanish Immersion Retreat program. It's a week-long program where you can join us in several different cities in Mexico for an unforgettable experience, learning Spanish, learning about the culture, the traditions, and the food of Mexico in real-life situations. So we hope you can join us. We'll leave a link in the description of this video where you can learn more. And we also dove deeper into this topic of señorita, señora in our podcast, which is all in Spanish. So if you want to learn even more about how and when to use these words and you want to practice your Spanish listening comprehension, we'll leave a link to that episode in the description of this video as well.
Well, thank you guys for watching. We hope you learned a lot from this video. And remember, el camino es el destino.
The journey is the destination. Hasta la próxima.
Adiós.